So it's a tough time for media, even though we as consumers are really relying on this information more than we have in a long time. The advertising revenue isn't there, and that's going to mean more pain at the worst possible time for local media and for local journalism.
If you're listening to this podcast, Daily Detroit, you're listening to local media. And the coronavirus pandemic has brought to the front something that you may not realize. After all, most Americans, according to a 2019 Gallup poll, not only think that their local news outlets are an important part of American democracy, but they also think they're financially healthy. And that's completely wrong. Cuts are happening across the industry, not just at newspapers, but radio stations and even TV is starting to feel the hit. This was happening even before this pandemic, and now it's increasing significantly. To me, whether it's City Hall, the county seat, or the state capitol, it's not a stretch to say that democracy itself is in danger without a vibrant press. Here in Metro Detroit, the problem is multifaceted. Not only do we have the pressures of the changing market and the pandemic, the largest advertiser in our community just went under, Art Van Furniture. So what's next? And what's an example of outlets coming together for the common good? I'm Jer Stays, and that's the focus of our conversation today with Matt Friedman. He's a media analyst and co-founder of Tanner Friedman Strategic Communications, and also joining me from his socially distanced underground lair, Sven Gustafson. Welcome to Daily Detroit, Matt.
Jared, thank you. Sven, thank you. Great to be here and talk some shop and some trends with the Daily Detroit audience, one of the best in town.
Well, thank you very much for that.
Thank you for that.
So first off, I wanted to start with kind of like the thing that is most immediate and local is recently there was a giant town hall, almost a virtual town hall. There was a collaboration between the three big news stations and Detroit Public Television. You were one of the people kind of at the nexus of pulling that together. As somebody who I used to work in broadcast television, that's hard to do. And it takes unique skills and unique timing. Matt, how did that kind of come together? Because it really seemed to me like a valuable public service.
Thanks. I was really a privilege to be a part of it, and it all came together really fast. This was Tuesday of last week. I got a call about 8:30 in the morning from Rich Homburg at Detroit Public TV, which is a longtime client of mine, both for PR and I also do some program development consulting for them. And Rich said, "We're working on a town hall. I've offered you to do communications. Stay tuned." A couple hours later, I get a text. There's a conference call at 3:30, and I was on a Zoom meeting with the general managers of Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 7, Detroit Public TV, and also CBS 50 and 62. And they had agreed during the course of the day to do this town hall on Thursday night. They had figured it all out from an engineering perspective. Promos were already being shot and cut. Talent had been selected, the anchors, and they had already figured out how they were going to take questions from the audience. So in the course of a business day, not even, the most fierce competitors that you could imagine in any business decided to come together for the good of the community. And one of the questions is, if we get the Michigan Association of Broadcasters involved, maybe some other stations around the state would pick it up. And by the end of the day, the next day, Wednesday, the day before the event, pretty much every TV station in the state had agreed to run it live, and a whole bunch of radio stations, commercial stations and public stations. So broadcasters really came together around this. My role was in promotions and publicity and communication of the event. A bunch of the news outlets, non-broadcast outlets, did stories on this and turned the town hall itself into stories by watching it live and writing about it. But it was an hour of television that broadcasters around the state basically donated to the people they serve. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before in this market, and could be a model, I think, for collaboration in media across the country.
It reminds me very much of, back in the day, there was this public service requirement, and a lot of news operations in TV news come from that public service requirement. So it was really good to see something like that, because I think in a lot of ways, when it comes to the news business and the industry in general, things are changing. And I wonder if more and more we're moving towards the necessity of having to have a public service requirement.
Well, the actual words that are used in the licenses of broadcast stations are to serve the public interest. And that gets forgotten about sometimes. And I give a lot of credit to these broadcasters here in our market who haven't forgotten about that. And they saw an opportunity to serve the public interest and they rallied around it. I should mention them by name so that, that they're better known. This is Greg Easterly at Channel 2, Marla Drutz at Channel 4, Mike Murray at Channel 7, Brian Watson at 50 and 62, and Rich Homburg, who I previously mentioned at Detroit Public TV. They're the ones who put their competitive nature to the side and had a conversation and decided to do this. And if it inspires other broadcasters and other in media to remind themselves that they existed in the first place to serve that public interest, that's a great thing.
For sure. For sure. So, kind of pivoting to the greater kind of local media, and I'd call it crisis in a way, because I'm not even talking about the conversations around politics, the fake news question, all that other stuff. I'm more looking at the underpinnings of the business. A lot of those underpinnings, I mean, they were shaky before, and some of them are really starting to shatter under the weight. You're seeing advertising drop, and I'm citing not just local stuff, but nationally. You can look at reports in the New York Times, look at reports in Recode and other digital publications where this switch away from legacy media is really becoming a crisis point from a financial standpoint. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
It is. Just one thing that makes our market a little bit different is we had a situation here even before the COVID-19 crisis that really negatively affected the business operations of our media outlets in this market. And that was the disappearance of Art Van Furniture. Yeah, Art Van was maybe the biggest advertiser in the history of broadcast media in this market, which goes back to the late 40s. I can't think of anybody, maybe the car dealers, if you aggregated all of them, that would have spent as much as Art Van. And Art Van basically disappeared from the airwaves and from the print pages overnight. And that in and of itself would have caused a crisis of some level for local and regional media. You layer on top of it what we're dealing with now, and it's really scary. And the cruel irony of this is that news consumption is up. I've heard some different numbers and don't want to quote any of them because I've only heard it anecdotally while working out of my house the last few weeks. But viewership is up for TV and viewership is up online for news that's delivered that way. And advertising is way down. I mean, if you watch any TV right now, you see a lot of public service announcements. You see a lot of promotional announcements. What you don't see is a lot of paid commercials. If you read the Sunday Free Press in print, it was really sad. There were very, very few ads, the least I can ever remember. And radio is really hurting right now because in the Detroit market especially, it's commute driven, it's car driven, and there really is no drive time right now. So it's a tough time for media, even though we as consumers are really relying on this information more than we have in a long time. The advertising revenue isn't there, and that's going to mean more pain at the worst possible time for local media and for local journalism.
It's sort of a twofold problem here too, right? Because advertisers, for one, are just, many of them are just trying to not spend any money right now just to try to ride this thing out economically. But two, and this is a longer trend that I think we've been seeing for a while, and I think your work in public relations, you can probably speak to this. A lot of these advertisers, they didn't want to have their ads next to a story about, say, Donald Trump or something like that, or, like political discord. Now they don't want to see their ads next to stories about the coronavirus and people dying from this pandemic and things like that, right?
I think there's some of that, but what I'm sensing more than anything are really two trends. Number one, you mentioned this, Sven. Advertising is the first thing that gets cut when budgets get cut. So you have companies and businesses that just don't want to spend money right now or can't spend money. That's number one. Number two is you have businesses that are not operating right now, retail in particular. So it doesn't make any sense for them to advertise. Normally, the purpose of the advertising is to increase foot traffic, and they literally can't have that foot traffic right now. And then I think there's just some trepidation that happens during downturns, even in one as sudden as this, is, should we be out there advertising? Does it make it look inappropriate somehow, as you mentioned. Part of the irony of this, too, is 2020 was supposed to be a banner advertising year because of the election. And I saw the first campaign spot. I saw an anti-John James spot, anti-Senate candidate John James yesterday. It was the first political advertising I had seen in a while. And one of the interesting elements there is that if people aren't gathering out in public, then signatures can't be gathered. And you wonder, will there be any ballot proposals this year in 2020?
Oh,
And the
yeah.
ballot proposals are often big advertising revenue opportunities for the media properties. So there's just a lot of things happening at once. But I just don't want anybody to think that this is because media is not trusted. Because, like I said, the numbers for consumption are high, and the desire for information is high, and the trust for media about this story is relatively high, and the business part is just not cooperating.
Mm. And then, of course, like as you mentioned before we started recording, nobody's holding events, which is another big driver of advertising, especially for publications like, alternative weeklies like Metro Times, which has laid off almost its entire staff and is basically, I think most of the people who are remaining are working pro bono.
Yeah, I mean, there's no concerts and there's no big gatherings at restaurants and there's no even Easter brunches. I mean, that's the incredible thing about this story and the economic impact of it is it's under every pebble and it's around every corner. And you think of all the stuff that's not happening and the domino effect of that, and a lot of that ends up being advertising or PR work or work for a communicator of some sort that's just not happening right now.
One of the trends that was happening even before this was kind of the trade of print or broadcast dollars in some cases to kind of digital dimes or digital pennies, as I've heard many a sales and advertising person talk about. And do you think that this kind of accelerates that a little bit? And because I mean, Facebook and others are seeing drops too, but their systems are all on demand, and that's something that can pop back up possibly very quickly. The other side about that is when you're talking about in-depth, serious reporting, that takes a lot more resources than reblogging a couple of tweets, right? And so how do you fund things like that going forward?
Yeah, I had a conversation with the publisher of a community newspaper week before last about this. I mean, all of the trends that could have been seen have been accelerated. It's like the billboard that you can kind of see if you're driving in traffic and you're driving, say, at 5, 10 miles an hour. It's down there, but you can't quite make it out. Well, if there's no traffic and you're zooming down the highway at 75, you see it really quickly. That's what's happened with some of these trends in media. And it's happened so quickly over the last not even month that they're at a point now where they thought they might not be for another year or two. And they have to make some decisions and they have to do it with a marketplace that's basically on hold. It's really tough. It's scary for those who are in it. And it's a little scary for those who are on the, like us, who are on the periphery of this, because all the work that we have to do is a part of this ecosystem and infrastructure takes money also.
Yeah.
So let's turn to like a little bit more, I guess, maybe hopeful signs, which is how news organizations are sort of adapting to this new reality. I mean, because part of the other thing is news organizations can't necessarily send people out to go cover things anymore, or there's going to be at least a resistance to do that just in order to keep people safe, right? So, I mean, what sort of things are you seeing outlets do? I mean, we're all recording this interview right now using Squadcast, a technology platform. We're all sequestered in our own homes, whatever. So, I mean, what kinds of things are you seeing other organizations do, Matt?
The use of this technology has just proliferated in the last few weeks. I have a client doing an interview today via Zoom with one of the TV anchors who is anchoring out of his house. And that's something that would have never been possible. And the lighting is not going to be great, and the audio is going to be decent at best, but the information is important. So the station is willing to do it. And so I think what you're seeing is a bit of a sacrifice on quality, but you're seeing a premium put on information and insight and technology platforms are being used and home studios are being put up. I mean, you have anchors anchoring the news from their homes, sometimes co-anchoring the news from two different homes. Technology is really being utilized and stretched here on TV, especially, but also on the radio. You have radio anchors who are anchoring from home, and talk show hosts who are hosting from home, which podcasters have been doing for a while now. And so I think one of the questions is that what's the business going to look like when this is all over? Are you going to see more of this? And the answer is you might, because it will probably end up being money saving in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because one of the top sports people in the market, Mike Valenti, has his podcast, and he talks about how much on it. I mean, this is different than his on-air broadcast. How much he loves working from home, how he never wants to go back to the studio. And all I could think about to myself while I was walking the dog, listening to this, is going, "Well, welcome. The water's fine," you know, because
Yeah.
it is actually a great way to go forward. And I wonder how much things get changed from having big, huge studios, a trend that was already starting to go away, to, focusing on the talent and the content and also delivering it how people consume, because you've got so many more people on Facebook now, so many more people connected to digital devices. If they're not using their cars as much, radio becomes less dominant because the number of radios in a home has gone down, according to the last share of ear report that I heard from Edison Research. So it kind of, as you said, it kind of brings those things forward. Do you think there's going to be any alternative monetization models that are going to be coming more to the fore? I mean, for us, I can speak, frankly, that for us, it's a blend of things, including membership, that help keep things going, where it's not necessarily about the biggest audience, but an audience that's willing to support you.
Yeah, I think that you're sort of the pioneers in all of this, as are some of the more entrepreneurial ventures that you collaborate with that we know exist here in Detroit. Detroit's been a bit of a laboratory for some entrepreneurial media, and I think that there's some things that the big media companies are going to learn from the entrepreneurs, that a revenue blend of some sort is necessary here. But we don't know what that's going to look like. There's a lot of predictions. Most of the predictions have proven to be wrong so far. But somebody has to, if you want the information and you want it to be credible and you want it to be interesting, then it has to get paid for somehow. And I think that there is going to be an audience that's going to be willing to pay for it. But if it's going to be at the scale that the big media companies are used to, if it's going to be at the volume that's going to mean that Wall Street is going to consider it to be a good investment, that is a big question mark going into whatever the next chapter is going to be.
Do you think, Matt, that some outlets simply just aren't going to survive this coronavirus pandemic and the shutdown and everything?
Unfortunately, it seems that way. I mean, there are going to be businesses of all sorts that aren't going to be able to survive this if it lasts a whole lot longer. And I think that'll include just about every industry you can think of. There's another big media business we haven't even talked about yet that's a question mark right now, and that's sports. I think the last time I was on with you guys, we were talking about sports and what a monster it is, Bigfoot on the media platform. And if sports aren't being played, then what becomes of sports media for very long? And that's another big wild card and question mark in all of this, because that was pretty much a sure thing when it came to making money in the media business, because sports is live, it's DVR proof. And sports fans are passionate and will spend time and will spend money. And without games being played, how's that going to work? Another big question in all of this.
Well, one of the things about sports in general as content, I think there's a high chance we're going to see professional sports come back in some way in 2020. But the higher chance is that there's going to be no crowds, because I don't know one doctor who says putting 20 or 70,000 or 100,000 people at the big house in Ann Arbor together is a good idea. And how compelling is content without the crowd? And what does that look like? And is it the same revenue opportunity? Do you trade it? How does that change?
Yeah, I mean, these are enormous questions that are being asked in the media business right now without any kind of playbook to go on. I mean, I think everybody in the media business learned during the Great Recession what audiences find valuable, what advertisers will still buy in a downturn, in a down market. So I think everybody in the media business has a good idea now of what a down market looks like, but what we don't understand is what no market looks like, or a significantly, radically altered market. What does that look like? And so I think there are probably a lot of projections going on right now, and a lot of models being played out. I think that's what a lot of people in the media business are doing from home offices or from kitchen tables. And there have to be a lot of contingency plans in place because, like I said, we're a few weeks into this. It's hard to project even a few weeks out, let alone a few months out. What's that going to look like? We just don't know. It's odd. Never been anything like this before. I mean, I have to tell you guys, when I first started in the media business and started working at radio and TV stations, they used to refer to the FCC license as a license to print money. It was the surest business in the world. You could produce 30, 40, 50% profit margins just by showing up, or so it seemed. And now that there's uncertainty around it, it's really different. And people who've been in the business for a long time probably have a hard time recognizing what they're doing.
I'd have to think also that there's an audience out there for sort of escapism, I guess, for lack of a better term. Like I know I have, and I'm sure you guys both have as well, where you just kind of go, okay, I've had enough of really scary headlines and coronavirus numbers. Like I need to read about something normal.
I mean, my favorite YouTube channel right now is about a duck farm in Vermont.
That's about as far from Detroit pandemic as you can get. I think.
That's because I'm in this all day, every day. So when I get done with the day, I check in on a duck farm and chicken farm in Vermont.
Yeah, I mean, sports is normally my escape.
Yeah.
And I don't have that. So I'm watching some, TV shows. I'm catching up on shows I probably should have watched a long time ago when they were popular. And I think if you talk to people, they all have those things. But at the same time, it sure seems like everybody's tuned in to current events in ways that maybe they weren't before. Maybe it was optional before and it feels mandatory now. And like I said, that's just the cruelest thing for people in the media business is their audience really wants them, but the revenue is just not there. And how's that going to end? And that's really hard.
So I guess my last question will be one that I'm sure that you may not like, considering our conversation about predictions. But is there a trend or something that you feel like is going, or a lesson that we're going to learn out of this coronavirus crisis, media, everything else? Kind of, if you look in your crystal ball a little bit, or even seeing the patterns that have already existed, what is the thing that you think that we're going to get out of this going forward in the media business?
I think this I think is a not so bold prediction. But I think health has been undercovered in our market in particular. Healthcare is the largest employer in this market. Health is a story that affects everybody every day. With an aging population, which we have in this state, it's more and more of an issue. And going into this crisis, we did not have very many journalists covering healthcare full time. And I'm not talking about the diseases and cures kind of stuff that we often see. I mean, the business of healthcare and the ramifications of healthcare and how it affects people in broad ways day to day, kind of undercovered by media in this market. And I think the only safe prediction that I have is whatever the media business ends up looking like coming out of this, health and healthcare will be more of a priority in coverage than it was before.
Yeah, interesting. It's almost a fifth of the U.S. economy, after all.
Yeah, and when you think about it, I don't want to leave anybody out, but we had a handful, maybe a pinchful of journalists that were paying attention to this full time. And I think on a percentage basis, it'll be more going forward.
Well, Matt Friedman, co-founder of Tanner Friedman Strategic Communications. He's also a media analyst. I know him as one of the PR people who always tell it to us straight.
I appreciate the opportunity. Really like what you guys are doing through this, keeping the community informed and keeping good conversation going. You're creating value, and we appreciate it.
I know it was a bit inside baseball, but I hope you got something out of that conversation. I sure did. A quick reminder of two things. First, if you like what you're hearing on Daily Detroit, do not forget to subscribe free in your favorite podcast app, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We do this every weekday. Second, Daily Detroit is people-powered media. Conversations and stories like these can happen thanks to our members at patreon.com patreon.com/dailydetroit. Your support keeps the show free for everyone else, and you get neat rewards and behind-the-scenes updates. It's great. Well, until next time, I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and we'll get through this together.